I think a very large part of it is just getting out of your daily life, getting out of your comfort zone.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting weekly episodes with me in English as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products to your creative practice since 1997. And if you're looking to add some pizzazz to your practice, check out their new line of additive glitter. Add a sprinkle of additive glitter to any Speedball fabric screen printing ink, and bring a touch of shimmer to your next design. This glitter additive can be used in nearly any ratio, so whether your sparkling vision is more subtle or dripping with scintillating shine. Check out the link in the show notes. This episode of Hello Print Friend is also brought to you by McLean's Printmaking Supplies, who've been dedicated to the art and artists of relief printmaking since 1979. The small specialist team in the Pacific Northwest is the leading supplier of Japanese relief tools for printmakers in the US and abroad, whose primary purpose is to help you find the materials and support you need to reach your printmaking goals. Our editor, Timothy Pauschak's two favorite tools are his Futatsuwaro Sankakuto 3mm V-gouge and his Josoi Maruto 1mm U-gouge, both from McLean's. But you don't have to take our word for it. These tools speak for themselves. So head on over to McLean's at imcleans.com and find your new favorite tool and keep on carving. My guest this week is Jeroen Smeets, founder of the Jaunt, a project that combines our two favorite things, travel and printmaking. The Jaunt sends artists on short trips somewhere they've never been before and then publishes an edition based on their experiences. We'll talk about how skateboarding and graffiti brought Jeroen into the world of art, the logistical joys and pains of taking on such a project, and what happens when a global pandemic strikes and you've got an artist on a silent retreat in a Sri Lankan monastery. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to buy the ticket, take the ride with Jeroen Smeets. Hi, Jeroen. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing, Miranda?
I'm good. I'm really excited to talk to you because you just kind of popped up in my DMs on Instagram and I clicked on your project and it just opened up this whole world for me. And it's one of my absolute favorite things about printmaking and art in general is that you can be hyper-focused on something for years and then still be delighted to learn about new things that people are doing. Yes. So I'm excited to talk and to learn more.
Amazing. Well, I'm here.
All right. So before we get into the Jaunt, which is the aforementioned project and all of the details, could you please introduce yourself and let people know who you are, where you are, what you do?
So my name is, the Dutch way of saying it is Jeroen Smeets. I'm originally from the Netherlands and lived in Amsterdam for a long while before I moved to Copenhagen, Denmark. And I've been here in Denmark for the last 12 years or so now. And about a year and a half ago, I, together with my family, my wife and our two kids, we moved to Aarhus, which is the second biggest city of Denmark. To be closer to family, to be out of the big city and more like closer to nature. And that's a very wonderful transition. And I work in the arts field. And one of the projects that I do is called the Jaunt, which has been my main focus for the last few years. And the Jaunt is a project that combines the two best things in life, art and travel. And the very short version of the project is, or the description is, we send artists on trips all over the world to find inspiration.
Yeah. And so growing up in the Netherlands, I feel like people really associate that country with the great museums and, of course, wonderful historical work and, kind of boundary pushing contemporary work. Was art a big part of your life or kind of your family's way of interacting with the world?
I wouldn't say that as growing up that it was a very big part, or like actively a very big part. I remember that my parents, they were members of art library, where you could borrow artworks from like a regular library. You could go to this place and borrow artworks for a set amount of time, and then have them hanging in your living room, and which is a nice concept, because that way you can have original artworks hanging on your living room, but also change them every, I don't know, whatever, 3, 5, 6 months, whenever you wanted to change it up again, you could change it up. And so that my parents definitely had an interest in visual and contemporary art. But then as I think around 15, 16, I got into skateboarding, and I think that's been the biggest drive in towards the culture and the visual aesthetic, through skateboarding, and then graffiti and street art later on. And yeah, you just kind of get that part of a lifestyle, and that becomes part of your life then.
Yeah. I've had a few guests on the podcast over the years who found their way to art through graffiti, skateboarding, that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think with skateboarding especially, it's at the essence, it's just like an athletic sport, of course, but it's so much more than a sport and a lifestyle and a culture, but more visually, it's also every skateboard, there's at the bottom of the skateboard, there's just an artwork from either in-house artists from the brands, or they collaborate with guest artists. So that's always been a very big introduction to meet or to get familiar with the work of new artists.
Yeah. And then, so you had this sort of crossover with skateboarding and that graffiti culture, and then it sounds like you went on to have a professional life in the arts as well. How did that come to be?
Yeah, so that I actually also came through skateboarding. Because of what I was because I was in the culture, I applied. A friend of mine, he worked at a magazine called the Reload magazine, and this was like a skateboard, surfboard, snowboard / culture magazine. And I first became I think it was called the webmaster back in the days, where you run the website something. And eventually transitioned on to become the editor-in-chief of the magazine. And there I really started working in a more professional capacity with artists, where every issue we had, we invited an artist to make the cover for the magazine. So I would contact artists, curate the artists, contact them, and then work together with trying to get the best cover possible for the magazine. And that actually transitioned into one of the artists that I worked with asking me hey, you know a lot of people in the skateboard, snowboard, surfboard industry. I would love to make work for a skateboard company. And why don't you try and find me work, and then you get a commission? And then I was okay, so I guess I can become sort of an agent or a manager. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where the whole first, I guess, professional side of the art world came into life.
And so during this time, were you traveling a lot for this job? Because I know, as you say, it's the two best things, it's art and travel. And when we were talking beforehand, we even found out that you've at least been to Santa Fe, which is not, huge on people's lists. You usually traveled a bit before you make it to Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm. It was in the heydays, I think I still got a little bit of the heydays of PR and marketing in terms of magazines. I was still happy enough to be a part of this world where you would get invited by brands to go for a press release of some kind of new product to be flown out to Los Angeles, and then go to other parts of the world just to play a computer game or something. So there was some traveling there. And then, that's always been a part of my life as well, and just exploring new parts of the world where you've never been before.
Yeah. It's a really wonderful part of being able to be alive and existing on this planet.
And I very vividly remember one of my first trips outside of Europe. This was together, I'm like, this was to South America, to Guatemala, and that was my first time like outside of like I might have been to the States before already, but so I went together with a friend of mine, and to me it was kind of like an eye opener. I remember sitting on a bus, and I didn't speak Spanish, but there was a kid in front of me, and we were still able to communicate just by like making jokes and funny faces and laughing at each other. Like we were different, like worlds apart, we didn't speak each other's language, but we could still communicate. And that's always stayed with me. And it's always been like, if you're open to meeting other people, then you will meet other people, and you will meet like-minded people as well.
Yeah, I definitely believe in that. And that sometimes I think having language and cultural barriers actually makes it easier to connect. I find that I'm out, in, Russia somewhere, and I don't find as many barriers as I do when I meet other Americans. And I think, maybe you come with a grace and understanding or something.
Yeah, you have like these preconceived notions of people closer to you.
Yeah.
Because they're wearing these kind of clothes, or because I'm meeting them at this place, then this must be that kind of person. And if you take all of that away, and you're just in a completely new environment where you don't know those like unwritten like rules of like who you're supposed to be or wwhatever, then you have no frame of reference. So you're just like, well, if I have positive energy and you have positive energy, then we're good.
Yeah, like it's like it strips it all down to just the like, hey, you're a human, I'm a human, and I mean you no harm and you mean me no harm, and let's have a laugh on the bus, Yeah,
it's exactly.
Lovely. Yeah, it's really wonderful. And so I know that the Jaunt sort of is in foundation is in printmaking and, print publishing. Did you have any interaction with that style of art making before founding the Jaunt, or was it kind of like the means to the end within the project?
Well, so through working at the Reload magazine, I got familiar. We actually, the very first screen print project I ever did was for an exhibition that I put together for a Reload magazine. It was I think the magazine existed for maybe 10 years, and we did like an overview exhibition of all the covers that we had made with all the different artists, and we made one screen print version of the cover of one artist. And that was my first print project. But then after that, I also started in Amsterdam. I had a location where I would host some small exhibitions, and I would work together with other people and that had galleries, and started like curating exhibitions and putting on shows and working with artists. So that kind of grew like naturally. And at the time, it was also working with prints and printmaking. It's an affordable way to start in the art industry, art world, so to say. So it's been a very gradual introduction towards the printmaking world.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the graphic work that comes out of street art culture translates really nicely to the edges and the colors that you can get in printmaking. And I have a lot of print friends who are screen printers and muralists, or graffiti artists and mezzotint artists. Like I think there's something about that just seems to naturally fit together.
Yeah, exactly. And it's mostly also just technical. Like it's just going to be a lot harder to really do justice to an oil painting in a screen printing technique. So yeah, you're right. And
maybe something in there too about people who are culturally kind of interested in standing on what's more of the fringes of the art world. If you have this vision of being a really classically trained oil painter and, for sure showing it a Basel somewhere, you're probably not going to be drawn to spray cans and screen prints.
No, maybe. Oh, no, exactly. And then even like from a skateboarding point of view, like traditionally now it's done with like heat transfers, but traditionally like the skateboards were made with actual screen printing techniques.
Oh yeah.
So like all the artists working from that field, they're very familiar with that process.
Yeah. And so when did kind of the idea for the Jaunt first come to you, and how did you go about making it a reality? So
the very first, like I'm always saying that like it took about a year from like the first inkling of the idea and then actually doing the first trip. And that year was a lot of it, like through working at the Reload magazine, I was interviewing a lot of artists and also working like as a freelance journalist. And in every conversation I would always have with artists, and when you talk about inspiration, a lot of it was being able to draw back on traveling again, when either people had just come back from a trip and that was usually inspiring for them, or they really wanted to go on a trip because of inspiration. And then at the same time, there was the crowdfunding was already sort of happening, but it was like relatively new in the culture, like in the culture industry or culture world, whatever you want to call it. Like a lot of it was still very tech and product based. But at the same time, I saw it like the first couple of like art projects happening through crowdfunding. And I was like, hey, this could be something. And that eventually just like over time, talking with other artists and seeing what they would be interested in doing. This is how the Jaunt came about. Like the very first trip is a good friend of mine, head off, and he wanted to really go to Helsinki. And my thought was like, okay, like how can I help make that possible? And like, of course I can just buy him a ticket, but like that, like, can we make something more with it? Like, how can we involve other people and an audience into this and make this into a project? And that's kind of like the first stepping stones of the Jaunt.
Yeah. And I feel like this might be a good time to just have you dive into kind of like the top to bottom what the Jaunt does. I know we sort of touched on it, but yeah, just sort of the structure around it and how you actually do get this kind of crowdfunding, traveling, art collecting, little cyclical cycle about a project from it.
Yeah. So like I'm the Jaunt. Like I've been saying we for a lot of times, but I'm also trying to see like, well, no, like it's I'm doing most of the work, like together with the artists and the printmakers, of course. But yeah, I've been doing the Jaunt for like 8 years now, and or almost 9 years, and we've sent 80 artists on a trip. And we announce that an artist is going on a trip through our platform, through our newsletter, through our Instagram, and at that moment we will announce that this artist is going to this location. And at that moment, we offered the opportunity for people to pre-order a print, the print that will be inspired by the trip. So at that moment, you only know which artist is going where, but the artwork isn't known yet. So you actually buy a print, you pre-order the print at sight unseen. You don't know what it's going to look like until you receive it at home once the print is done. So the artist goes on their trip. They keep a travel diary that we share through our platform again, and that the artist shares through their Instagram and whatever channel they have. And this way, all the people who pre-order the print and the rest of the audience, they're all part of this journey and this travel and this inspiration experience. So then the artist comes home, they come back to the studio, they make their artwork, which we then produce as a limited edition prints, and we ship those out to all the people who have pre-ordered the print. And this sometimes can take like a few months before the print gets done. So it can really be a surprise, like, oh yeah, I forgot I ordered this, and then all of a sudden you have this artwork from like maybe your favorite artist who's been on a trip, and then you had that's just received at home.
Yeah. And so you said you started with a friend of yours, but how did it kind of grow? I mean, as we were talking about a little bit off air, you and I got connected because Swoon reposted about the interview I did with her, and you'd worked with her, and, you know, she's a big international artist. So it seems like the Jaunt has expanded from, you know, friends who just want to go to Helsinki. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think the first 10 trips was all artists that I knew personally or had met before or had worked like on another kind of project before. But that's like that very quickly enough, that wasn't sustainable anymore. So I had to reach out to artists who I'd never met before. But luckily it's not a very bad email to send to people. It's like, hey, I run this art project. Do you like to travel, and where do you want to go? It's a good conversation starter. So that's been able, like, now there's a lot of, like, I think 80 to 90% of all the artists I haven't met before when I first contact them to and asking if they'd be interested in joining our project.
Gotcha. And so is that usually how it works, is that the artist will choose their destination? Like they'll say, hey, I've always thought that Venezuela would really fit in well with what I'm doing. Is it usually their choice?
There's two options. It's either me asking them like, hey, what's your top 5 bucket list of places you've always wanting to go to? And most importantly in that bucket list is like, why do you want to go there? And then another option would be that I know of a great location which I think fits the artist, like their them personally, or their artwork or their style. And then I do a suggestion, like, for example, like, hey, would you like to go to Addis Ababa, in the capital of Ethiopia? And yeah, so it can be either or, and but it's always, the most important part is that it's a place where the artist has never been to before. Just to make sure that the impressions are as fresh and as new as possible. And then, of course, we have a budget that we need to work with as well. So everything, we need to make it work. And we can't just ship everybody off to the Antarctics and stay for 2 weeks. But luckily, if you're, like, I found out, like, if you're flexible in your timing, and there's a lot of places you can go to within a reasonable budget.
Yeah, I've definitely found that as well. If you can wait on a ticket,
exactly,
yeah, which is great.
Yeah. And then it's also just a matter of which artist are you sending where. Like you can keep artists on their own continent, and they'll be more affordable than across oceans, of course. But then some connections are more affordable than other connections again. So there's usually quite a lot possible.
Yeah. Because, I mean, of course, like Oslo is going to be a much more expensive 2 weeks than Chiang right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly. There's local costs as well, exactly. So sometimes you can fly to a destination that is cheaper to be at, and then the ticket can be more expensive again.
Yeah, so it just has to be a lot of kind of budgeting and just getting a sense of how long does it take, or how much does it take to live somewhere. I mean, is that just
exactly
Googling? Yeah. I mean, how do you find out how much does 2 weeks cost in Johannesburg?
Well, it's a little bit of common sense, I suppose, and then you also just try to find out like some like. I think usually you can see on accommodation prices, like hotels or Airbnbs. Right. By that, you can kind of make an estimation on how expensive the city itself is. And then for our trips, actually, we sent the artist like 5 to 6 days on the trip, which I always think is long enough to get a real impression of the place, and short enough that you want to go back again.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
You're like over a week, then you might be like, I've seen it here. Like, what am I going to do today again? Like, so they go here again, or like, I think 5-6 days is really like a perfect sweet spot.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Because there's really not enough time to get homesick, to let the kind of buzz of a new country or a new city wear off in that 5-6 day period, and you're still treating every day with like an intense preciousness. Everything
is new. Like you're not walking the same route twice, basically.
Yeah. And then so how are the prints actually made? I know you do like a lot of screen printing. Is there a studio in Copenhagen you collaborate with, or yeah?
When I started, I worked together a lot with a print studio in the Netherlands, which I kind of just started the project together with him. He runs under the name Hand Printed Stuff, But over time, purely logistical, it makes so much more sense when we work with an American artist to print in the US. And we work with artists like now, even in Europe, like if we work with a Spanish artist, we'll work with a Spanish printer. And over time, of course, you meet a lot of printers and a lot of different print studios. So we're able to, it's much more every print. I'm looking at like, all right, where does it make most sense to make this print, either on budget or on availability, but also on how important is it that the artist is able to be close to the studio.
Right. It makes a lot of sense, and it reminds me of a few years ago on the podcast I had Raking Light. Do you know that project?
No.
They do original prints with tattoo artists. And
Okay,
so,
yeah.
if the tattoo artist is in Australia, they'll find a master printer in Australia to collaborate with, or Spain or
Yeah.
Thailand. And so, that, of course, that makes great sense to
Yeah.
find someone where the artist is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Then again, I worked with like 3 or 4 Australian and New Zealand artists as well at the beginning of last year. But the cost of printing it's so much higher over there, just because it is an island and everything just needs to be imported. So everything, like, it was triple the price of what I would pay for a print in Europe or even in the US as well. So for those artists, we actually printed in Europe and then shipped back and forth, which was still considerably more cheaper than printing in Australia.
Yeah, my husband and I moved to Sydney when he was doing his MFA in printmaking there, and we got a shock when we saw the cost of inks and papers that side of the Pacific. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, some pockets of the world, it's just more expensive and I can only imagine it's just because they need to import everything and it's not produced there, so it's just more expensive for them to produce, of course.
For sure.
Yeah. And then, like, I learned this out like the hard way as well, because at one point we had an artist from Los Angeles. This was very in the beginning, in the first year or the second year. So we had an artist from Los Angeles who flew to Greece and then flew home again, made his artwork. The prints were produced in the Netherlands. So we shipped the prints to Los Angeles. Then he signed and numbered the prints. They were shipped back to the Netherlands again, and half of the prints had sold to people in the US, so they needed to be back again. So that was you spend a lot of money on shipping very quickly.
Yeah. So it sounds like any kind of new thing in the world. It really was learning as you go and figuring out, how to streamline
and then also
things.
Build a network to make that happen as well. So now, like, we know various printers in the US that we can work with, and then at times even I'm able to hire somebody who can help us with distribution of the prints. When, like, sometimes we have a big audience in the US, even though we're like Europe based project, but sometimes, like, all of the prints will just ship to the US, so it doesn't even make any sense to ship the whole box of prints back to me again before we ship them out.
How do you pick artists to work with? Do you get approached by people? Do you just kind of, as you say, you're building this network, you're learning about all these different people around the world, and you just, send the email to people that you just know would make good prints?
Yeah, so I don't have an open application process for this Jaunt project. So I've from the beginning on, it's always been a curated project. So every artist is approached by me personally to be a part of this project. And a large part of it is, can we do their artwork justice in a print? That's a very big part of it. Another big part of it is would I enjoy an artwork from this artist up on my wall? And that's, I think, a good way to go about curating the artist for your own project. And then it's a combination of, are they interested in the project, and do they have the time to participate in the project? But yeah, it's very on curation only. So it's everybody is invited to become to join the project.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you're taking part in that long tradition of, gallerists and curators who are really finding creative ways to build their own collection, which which is wonderful, because then it all comes from that real place of connection with the work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And while we've worked with over 80 artists by now, and if you put two together, they can be worlds apart in style and in methods and in theme. But I think, or at least I hope, that if you see all 80 next to each other in as a group, then they all share the same sort of creative energy that is very do-it-yourself, very hands-on, and very focused on their crafts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from just perusing the website, you can definitely see, for me, a a theme, and a bit of an aesthetic theme, but just also like the theme in quality of composition and of care. And I think that comes probably from inviting established artists who have been working in their field for a while and just understand making an image. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, also I'm always hoping and trying to keep a balance of more established artists and younger upcoming artists as well, because I think the two feed each other with like creative energy as well, where it'd be nice for the younger upcoming artists to be aligned with the well-established artists and in the same project, but also for maybe the well-established artists to be introduced to new artists through our platform and through our project.
Yeah, I definitely try to do that with this podcast as well. Because it's exciting to hear about people you haven't known about, and it's also exciting to hear from people who you already admire. It both keeps it really interesting. Yeah,
exactly. And all the new people who are bringing new things to the project and are young and upcoming, they'll always bring new and exciting things along with them.
Is the idea of getting people to purchase works before they've seen them, because I've seen that model a few places, and particularly in the printmaking world, we'll find shops where someone will be a patron of the shop and then they get one of everything that's produced there throughout the year. And I always really admire people who can make that model work because there's such a level of trust involved in it. And so maybe, I don't know, kind of speak to using that as part of the model. I know also you can purchase some of the prints that aren't sold out through the Jaunt's website as well. So you've got kind of a pre and post project sales going on. Yeah. But yeah, about building that trust and building that audience who is willing to go out on the limb and say, you know, I haven't seen what this is going to be, but I bet it's going to be good. Yeah.
So for like that also comes a little bit back to the curating the artist. Like because we sell these prints by pre-order, I think it's important for people to make an educated guess of what a next artwork could potentially look like. And while you have some amazing artists who are very fluid in their style and they'll go all over the place, I don't think those artists work particularly well for our project because people can't make that educated guess of what their next artwork could look like. So I'm also considering like how close people keep to their own work and their own style and their own visual aesthetic and language. And then I'm still amazed that people buy prints and artworks that they don't know what they look like yet and spend money on that. And even when we did the very first trip back in 2013, we always make an edition of 50 prints and that sold out the first time. And I was amazed by that people, this was a new idea and it was new and people were not familiar with it yet. They didn't know what the artwork was going to look like, but they knew the artist and they trusted me because a lot of from this first trip it was a lot of like friends and family that supported, of course. But it's just been running ever since. And I think now also like we're almost 9 years in, have been able to establish a very big trust and reputation with not only the artists but also our audience and our collectors. And we have a handful of people who are ambassadors of the Jaunt, and they at the beginning of the year they buy the whole year basically of prints. So they don't even know which artists are joining the project.
Yeah, I would guess that after 9 years of consistently producing beautiful prints, you would have people who would just be like, all right, whatever it is, I'm here for it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I hope so. Yeah. And like, well, judging by the ambassadors that we have, that is the fact, luckily. And it's very, very rewarding to be able to work like together with the artists to making that possible and making these prints happen for these collectors who have so much trust in the project.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's probably something in there, too, that does make it fun about the unknown. And I think with prints, because you can sell them at accessible price points, people are willing to take that risk and buy into that fun a bit of the mystery of not knowing.
So we while we have the give people the chance to pre-order these prints, that's at a very affordable price. It's like 75 euros, which is probably like $85, I guess. But when we do not sell out a print in the pre-order, the prints are available afterwards still as well. And then the price is higher because the people who supported the project, the trip from the beginning, they need to be rewarded, of course. And the other people they should have just ordered it to begin with.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, about the pricing before and after, because usually in the models it is a bit less if you go in on faith and kind of front load the project with the funds, and that it makes sense. And there's that, I think that kind of excitement about opening up something and not knowing what it's going to be. And, gosh, I mean, people spend $80 worth of money on way stupider things than surprise art.
No, and I also think like at the price point that we're at, there's two things that are really interesting, I think, with this model. Like the first one is if you don't like the artwork, the price is still like good enough. You can gift it to a friend. It's a nice like birthday gift you can give to somebody else. But I think more interestingly, it's also when you walk into a gallery and you look at the artworks on the wall, you'll immediately have like, I like this one, I don't like that one, this is my favorite. Visually, you're already making like judgments about it and seeing what fits you and your style. But what I've learned with this project is that people who have bought the print before they knew what it was going to look like, once it comes home, even if they don't like it, they'll give it another chance because they're invested in it in a completely different way. They've made this trip possible because they pre-ordered the print. They know the story of how it came to be, what this artist has done on the trip, which like moment on their trip has inspired them to make the artwork. So your investment in emotional and financial investment in this artwork is completely different from the regular art world buying experience.
That's such a good point that I hadn't thought of before. But of course, you're right, because in a way, since you've seen the project go, it's like seeing art from a friend. You always bring more grace and patience and appreciation when it's someone that you know and you know the process that went into it.
Yeah, and you can't know this from every artist and every gallery visit that you make, of course. But in this project, like it's really like I think the analogy with like a friend like is very accurate as well, because it's you're part of the entire process and you don't just show up to see the outcome.
And that kind of leads into my next question, which is maybe sort of twofold in that, why is it that travel is so inspiring, and what kind of moments do you find spark interest in the artists that you send? Is there a theme? Is it architecture, people, or it seems to work really well, but what is it about the actual experience of travel that does it?
Well, I think a very large part of it is just getting out of your daily life, getting out of your comfort zone of your studio, of your house, of your way to work, getting out of your social circle and putting yourself into a completely new environment where everything is new, and you don't, like what we were talked about earlier as well, you don't have these preconceived notions about other people, and you're really so much more open to adventure and anything that comes your way. And you have to be, because travel is always it's always up in the air, and like even if you have a lot of experience like travel planning, there's always the unexpected will always happen. And then in terms of like where our artists find their inspiration, it's also completely dependent on the person, of course. And this is also where when I talk with an artist about which location they're going to go to, I'm trying to find the best place for them where they can find that inspiration. So an artist who takes a lot of inspiration from architecture and from graphic or interior design, we'll send them to a place where they can experience that more than the jungle of Costa Rica. And an artist who's more into plant life and into like the flora and fauna of things, we'll send that artist to the rainforest of Costa Rica. So it's also about finding the right destination for the right artist. But to be honest, like I think that aside, like what this whole COVID times has taught me is that you don't need to go to the other side of the world to find inspiration, and you can find it literally in your own backyard or in your own country. And just taking yourself out of your own home life and doing something else, which can be just sleeping in a cabin in the woods, that can already provide that inspiration. But I also think that without even traveling, I think that if you put the right artist who's open to this, would put them in like an elderly home or a nursing home where they can talk with people who they normally wouldn't have conversations with for like 4 or 5 days. I think it's the same as traveling without actually doing the own distance yourself. You're getting to learn all the amazing histories from these people who have lived their like full lives already.
Yeah. I was going to ask about how the Jaunt was affected, of course, by the pandemic, because there are many aspects of the arts that, like residencies and that kind of thing, that are reliant on this free and relatively affordable travel. How did it pivot during the last 2 years? Well,
so also to come back to Swoon, she was the very first artist that was affected by COVID in our Jaunt programming. And the weird thing was actually that she traveled to Sri Lanka and was staying in a monastery where this was on like some kind of like silent yoga retreat. And she did not have her phone on her when she went in. And by the time she came out, which was like 10 days later, like this whole pandemic had blown up and the world was in lockdown, but she had no clue. Like she literally like opened her phone and had messages from all her friends and people that she knew, like, "Hey, where are you? Are you okay?" And she's like, "Wait, what happened?" She had no clue that the world went in lockdown. So like she got out of the monastery and stayed with a good friend where we had like already arranged to put her up. And then we just kind of figured out, like, all right, can you stay there longer? Do we need to get you home? And eventually we got her home and everything was fine. But after that, like, travel was definitely impacted because, like, we had programmed, like, at least 4, 5, 6 months ahead, like, with flight tickets and everything, where people were going, like, across borders and flying to other countries. But we were able to quite quickly to pivot into, instead of traveling abroad, like traveling within your own country. And that still provided a lot of opportunities for people to explore new parts of their country where they had never been to before. And luckily also I managed to find a few people who had actually recently moved to another country before the pandemic, and therefore like the entire country was still like very new to them. We worked with an artist who he had moved from the Netherlands to Australia. Another artist who is originally from Chicago, who's now based in Denmark. So we just kind of focused on travel within the own country where the artist was staying. And those things were always kind of available, luckily.
Yeah, that is something that I have appreciated with the pivoting that people have had to do, is that maybe hopefully taking some of that patience and openness that we have when we go internationally and turning it into our own country, because we have access to that space energetically at any time. It's just we go into a different phase when we're, climbing Mount Fuji than when we're at the supermarket, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even in a small country like the Netherlands, like in the US, like there's for anybody who's living in the US, there's so much to explore. But even in the Netherlands, which is a tiny country in comparison, we were still able to find like exciting new places where people had never been to before, and were really able to step outside of their comfort zone and have a completely different like 4, 5, 6 day adventure.
Yeah. How many artists were traveling a year about, like approximately before the pandemic?
I think we do 10 trips a year, and we've been able to do that in the pandemic still as well.
Oh, great. That's wonderful.
So we had Swoon, who was the first artist who like kind of, I guess, stepped into the pandemic while on their trip. But then the first trip after that was an artist from Oakland called Anna Valdes, And she was originally supposed to go to Alaska, but that of course got canceled. And then for her trip, we made it like a lockdown edition where she was in her own studio and did all kinds of workshops through Instagram Live. And we kind of, instead of her going into the wide world, we invited the world to come into her studio, and she did these like workshops on acoustic painting and monotype and printing and mixing your own pigments, and so we kind of like just switched it up.
Yeah, that's really it's funny that Swoon was in the monastery in Sri Lanka through your project, because I spent the Dallas Art Fair with her. And she was telling me about that. She was telling me like the weird experience that she just kind of in passing, how she's like, you know, I was in a silent retreat and then I came out on the other side and I didn't even know it was through the jaunt. But that's so funny. Yeah. That she just is like, was like, well, and, you know, knowing Callie and having worked with her, you know, I mean, I feel like you couldn't ask for a more, relaxed, kind of up for anything artist for it to happen to. You know, I can just really imagine her being like, all right, well, what's next? You know, like
exactly.
not panicking. Yeah. She's great.
There's
like
definitely been artists that I've worked with over the last 9 years who would have reacted differently.
Yeah.
And maybe rightfully so.
Yeah, she's pretty unflappable, which is great. Yeah. And then, I mean, I reckon has been like a few difficulties here and there over the last 9 years of, you know, I'm sure, you know, maybe an artist going somewhere and getting sick or, you know, something like that.
Yeah. The biggest surprise to me, and this has got to happen at some point, but of the 80 artists or the 80 trips that we've done, and like nobody has missed a flight yet.
Oh my gosh. Touch wood. Hurry. Yeah.
It's I don't like, I statistically that should not be possible.
Yeah, wow.
We've had some people we had one artist who was in Miami, and then there was like a hurricane, and she or I don't know what it was, but there was some kind of weather that influenced her flight back, but I was still able to book her on another flight back. We had one artist who was in Japan, and he was on like this island all the way in the south of Japan, and he had like the plan was to be there for like 3 or 4 days on the island. But then on the day that he was supposed to go home, he couldn't go home because there was one of the typhoons was racing past the island, and like the ferry wasn't going anymore. And like the person who ran the accommodation there came by with like extra food and water. Is like, hey, make sure to lock your windows and close up. Don't go outside. And but that typhoon passed, and he was able to get home again as well. So
gotcha.
There's definitely been some moments, but nothing like too crazy. Well, yeah, I guess it depends on what's too crazy. We had one artist. His name is Cody Hudson. He was in this rainforest in Costa Rica, and on his last night he was woken up by an earthquake while he was in a treehouse, sleeping in a treehouse. So.
Oh my gosh. I mean, but that's all part of also, I think, why travel does open us up, is as you say, like you can be the best trip planner in the world, but typhoons and earthquakes, you know, they'll come when they're coming, and they don't care about your tickets or your ferry rides. Yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah. So you have to roll with it. You have to make it work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what are some dreams for the future for the Jaunt? If you want it, you know, another 9 years from now, would you like to send someone to Antarctica? Would you like to have more artists traveling, or do you have something?
Well, I think 10. We do 10 trips a year now, and I think that's kind of like a max of like the attention span that we can have, and just to like, of course, we could plan double, but I don't think it's quality over quantity.
Yeah.
And for the last 3 years, I've organized a summer camp as well, where we invite 4 artists to become to get together and be at the same location, and then just talk with each other. Like, we'll do some excursions and we'll have a good time. And it's more the artists coming together, learning from each other, like sharing tips and tricks with each other. And then also in the last summer camp, we actually invited the artists to make original artworks on site as well. So we built like these temporary studios where the artists could work. And this was an amazing location in Sweden where the people who were hosting us there were super friendly, and also every time I asked, like, hey, could we maybe do this here? They're like, yeah, great, awesome, let's do it. So they were open to every idea we had. Like, there was like one old shed that they had on the grounds, and one of the artists, he just dismantled the whole shed and built like this sculpture out of wood. And at the end of the week, we lit it on fire. And so going into the future, I don't think we'll be doing more trips. But what I have been focusing more on is also, while the artists are traveling, getting original artworks inspired by their trip, either made on their trip or made after at home again, and then turning that, working together with other galleries at different places of the world to turn that into exhibitions.
Oh, yeah. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah. And then last year we had an exhibition in Amsterdam at the Straatmuseum, which is like a big street art graffiti museum in Amsterdam, where we had, I think it was we had about 40 of our prints on display and on in the exhibition, and that looked amazing. And now I'm wondering how big of a wall we need to put all of the prints that we ever made up on one wall.
Yeah. I mean, you must be getting quite an archive.
Yeah, I think so we've done 80 trips, but we sometimes do like 2 prints with an artist. So I think we're up to like 100 different print editions by now.
Very cool. And where can people find the Jaunt and follow the Jaunt and purchase work and kind of get involved in that way?
Yeah, we're on thejaunt.net. That's our website. People can sign up for the mailing list to hear first which next artist is going on a trip, and to hear all the announcements. And then it's just the Jaunt on Instagram, and if you still use Facebook, I guess that works.
I feel like, more and more when I ask people that question, it shows they're like, yeah, website, Instagram,
that's kind of it, right?
Facebook, kind of, you know, like there's sort of it trails off a little bit, but yeah, I mean, like the podcast has a Facebook, and it just kind of pushes everything from Instagram, and occasionally if there's like an article or something that's you can't really share that on Instagram, we'll go there. So it's,
yeah, exactly. No, but I think our website is the main address of where you want to be, because on the website we'll have the entire print archive, and then you can also see and read back all of the travel diaries that the artists have made during their trip, like even from trip number 1 to all the way up until now, and that will get you the most information and the most interesting stories to read as well.
Yeah, I was definitely wanted to plug that travel diary aspect, because that's really cool. Just to be able to see the thought process. Yeah. Exactly.
For me personally, the travel diary is worth the most by now. Like, I almost see like the screen print that we produce. It's almost like a super deluxe postcard that we're sending out to people. But the travel diary is what makes me the most excited about this project, and just being like, some of the artists are really honest and open about what they're doing, how it's influencing them, and write beautifully about that whole process as well. And that's where I can see also, like, well, whatever they're doing on this trip and whatever inspiration they find for the one print edition that we'll make, or the 2 print editions that we'll make sometimes, like, aside from that, what they've experienced here will stay with them for a lifetime, and will create new work down the line as well.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on, is letting people know they've got these wonderful 80 trips worth of diaries they can dive into and see the archive. And yeah, thank you so much. This was really fun to learn about the project, and it's given me the travel bug and the art buying bug all at the same time.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we can cater to that.
Yeah. You can help with that. Yeah. Well, that's our show for this week. If you liked today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content like Shop Talk Shorts with our editor, Timothy Pauschak. He digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with our guests. And if you listen this far, you might be that special kind of print friend who would leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. It would mean the world to us when you did, and no joke, it really does help support the show. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest is Brett Nannup, a Noongar printmaker living and working in Perth, Western Australia. We'll talk about how when his mother Laurel took a printmaking class later on in her life, started them both on a path that brought them to a deep love for printmaking. storytelling through the medium, being able to reach the things that are hard to talk about through art making, and how his mom's second ever woodcut was turned into a 5-meter tall cast aluminum sculpture in Perth's Elizabeth Quay. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.